The underestimation. The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with the familiar hum of universal translators as representatives from 47 star systems gathered for what they believed would be a routine military assessment. Admiral Zephix of the Crystalline Empire adjusted his ceremonial armor, the light refracting through his transparent skin, creating rainbow patterns across the polished floor. Beside him, General Korthak of the Iron Claws clan sharpened his natural weapons against the metal plating of his uniform, each scrape echoing through the vast hall. "The humans request membership in our military alliance," announced Chancellor Vexhai, her four arms gracefully manipulating the holographic display that showed Earth's blue-green sphere rotating slowly in the center of the room. "Their planet appears primitive." Laughter rippled through the assembly, not the kind of cruel mockery that lesser species might employ, but the gentle amusement of beings who had conquered solar systems before humanity had discovered fire. To them, Earth looked like a backwater world covered mostly in water and patches of green wilderness that served no apparent strategic purpose. General Korthak's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a chuckle among his species. Look at their surface composition. 70% water, and the remaining landmass is largely covered in, what do they call it? Forests? Jungles? How does a species advance technologically while wasting so much territory on uncontrolled plant growth? Admiral Zephix's crystalline form shimmered as he accessed the military databases. Their technological advancement is respectable for such a young species. Nuclear capabilities, basic space travel, primitive but functional weapon systems. However, their military doctrine appears to be based on something they call guerrilla warfare in these wilderness areas. Hardly the organized battlefield tactics that win galactic conflicts. The holographic display zoomed in on various Earth locations, showing dense tropical forests, mountain ranges, and vast wilderness areas that remained largely untouched by human civilization. To the assembled galactic military leaders, these appeared to be nothing more than obstacles that any competent species would have cleared away millennia ago to make room for proper infrastructure. Commander Silthus of the Void Swimmers raised a tentacle in question. "Have we analyzed their military capabilities? Surely they understand that modern warfare takes place in the vacuum of space, not in these primitive jungle environments." Chancellor Vexhai manipulated the display to show Earth's military installations. Clean, organized bases with impressive technology, but scattered across continents and often built around or within natural landscapes rather than replacing them entirely. Their military seems oddly attached to operating within natural environments. They maintain training facilities in jungles, deserts, mountains, and other undeveloped areas. It's an inefficient use of resources. "Fascinating," murmured Dr. Kelthera, the Council's leading military strategist, her insectoid features clicking as she processed the information. They've actually adapted their technology to work within these natural environments rather than replacing them. It suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of how advanced warfare operates. The data streams flowing through the chamber painted a picture of humanity that seemed almost quaint to the assembled leaders. Earth's military forces were well equipped by the standards of a single-planet species, but their tactics and training seemed focused on operating in environments that more advanced civilizations had long ago learned to control or eliminate. Admiral Zephix's form brightened as he reached a conclusion. "I propose we accept their alliance request, but with a standard probationary period. We'll send our assessment teams to evaluate their capabilities firsthand. If they prove useful, they can serve in support roles. If not," he let the implication hang in the air. "What type of assessment do you recommend?" Chancellor Vexhai inquired, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Standard galactic military evaluation. We send a small force to one of their training areas, demonstrate proper military tactics, and evaluate their response." based on their apparent preference for these wilderness environments, will conduct the assessment in one of their jungle regions. It should be a simple matter of showing them how real soldiers operate in any environment. General Korthak's claws scraped against his armor as he leaned forward eagerly. My Iron Claws battalion would be perfect for this assessment. We've conquered jungle worlds before. These earth forests can't be significantly different from the vegetation-covered planets we've subdued in the past. The assembled council members nodded in agreement. They had seen this scenario play out countless times before. A young species with limited experience would request membership in the galactic community, undergo a routine evaluation, and either prove themselves worthy of junior partnership or accept a more limited role suited to their capabilities. Very well, Chancellor Vexahai declared. General Korthak, you will lead a battalion strength force to Earth for a military assessment. Choose one of their jungle training areas and demonstrate proper tactical procedures. Make contact with their military leadership and arrange for a joint exercise. This will allow us to evaluate their capabilities while providing them with valuable learning opportunities. As the council session concluded and representatives began filing out of the chamber, quiet conversations filled the air. Most focused on routine administrative matters, trade agreements, and the mundane business of managing a galactic alliance. The Earth assessment was barely worth mentioning beyond the immediate tactical considerations. Dr. Kelthera lingered behind, studying the Earth data with her compound eyes. Something about the human military doctrine nagged at her analytical mind. In her centuries of studying warfare across the galaxy, she had learned to recognize patterns, and there was something about the human approach that didn't fit the usual models. Troubling thoughts, Doctor? Admiral Zephix had also remained, his crystalline form still glowing softly in the dimmed chamber lights. Perhaps, she replied, her mandibles clicking thoughtfully. I've been analyzing their historical military records. They have an unusual number of conflicts where smaller, less equipped forces defeated larger, more advanced armies using these wilderness environments to their advantage. Historical curiosities, the Admiral dismissed. Once they understand how proper galactic military operations function, they'll abandon these primitive tactics. Every species goes through this transition when they join the broader galactic community. Dr. Kelthera wasn't entirely convinced, but she kept her reservations to herself. The assessment would proceed as planned, and in a few weeks, they would have definitive answers about Earth's military capabilities. In her long career, she had learned that the universe occasionally produced surprises, but the fundamental principles of warfare remained constant across all civilizations. What she couldn't have known, as she filed away the Earth data and prepared to leave the chamber, was that halfway across the galaxy, a very different kind of military preparation was taking place. In the Eskuti, the jungle awakens. 3 weeks later, the Iron Claws battalion descended through Earth's atmosphere in their standard military formation. General Korthak watched through the viewport of his command ship as the green canopy of the Amazon rainforest spread out below them like an endless carpet. To his experienced eyes, it looked like any other jungle world they had conquered. Just another patch of uncontrolled vegetation that needed to be managed with proper military precision. Establish landing zone Alpha in the central clearing, he ordered his communications officer. Standard defensive perimeter, full sensor sweeps. We'll set up base camp and wait for the human military representatives to arrive. The Iron Claws were renowned throughout the galaxy for their efficiency and brutal effectiveness. Each soldier stood nearly 3 meters tall, with natural armor plating and retractable claws that could slice through most known materials. They had conquered jungle worlds across 17 star systems, always following the same proven tactics: clear the vegetation, establish proper sight lines, and control the terrain through superior firepower and positioning. Within hours, their base camp was operational. Massive trees had been felled and cleared away, creating perfect fields of fire in all directions. Sensor arrays monitored the surrounding jungle, and automated defense systems covered every approach. It was a textbook example of how advanced military forces operated in hostile territory. Colonel Sarah Mitchell of the U.S. Army Special Forces arrived at the designated meeting point as the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the remaining trees around the alien camp. She moved quietly through the jungle, observing the massive clearing the Iron Claws had created. Behind her, spread throughout the surrounding forest in positions invisible to the alien sensors, were 30 of the most experienced jungle warfare specialists on Earth. She had spent 3 days studying the alien technology and tactics, watching their landing and setup procedures from hidden positions kilometers away. What impressed her most wasn't their impressive equipment or overwhelming firepower, but how thoroughly they had announced their presence to everything within 50 kilometers. Every animal, insect, and plant in the region now knew exactly where these invaders had set up camp. "General Korthak, I presume," Sarah said as she emerged from the tree line into the brightly lit alien compound. The massive alien warrior turned to face her, his dark exoskeleton gleaming under the artificial lights that had turned night into day throughout their base. "Colonel Mitchell," Korthak replied, his voice translated through a device that made his words sound oddly mechanical. "I was expecting someone larger." "Are you truly a representative of Earth's military forces?" Sarah smiled, recognizing the same underestimation she had encountered throughout her career. At 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighing barely 140 pounds, she had spent 20 years proving that size wasn't the most important factor in jungle warfare. "I am. I understand you wanted to conduct a joint training exercise to evaluate our military capabilities." "Indeed." Korthak gestured with one massive claw toward the surrounding jungle. "We will demonstrate proper military tactics for operating in vegetation-covered terrain, and your forces can observe our methods. This will provide valuable learning opportunities for your species as you integrate into galactic military structures." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds educational. However, I should mention that this is our training ground. We know it quite well. Would you be open to making this more of an actual exercise rather than just a demonstration?" Korthak's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "You wish to engage in combat exercises against my battalion? Colonel, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but my soldiers are trained to operate against galactic standard military forces. We have equipment and capabilities far beyond anything your single-planet military has encountered." "I understand completely," Sarah replied. "But consider this. You're here to assess our capabilities. Watching us observe your demonstration won't tell you much about how we actually perform under pressure. Why not set up a simple scenario? Your forces try to locate and neutralize a small team of our soldiers operating in this jungle. Nothing lethal, just training rounds and sensors to determine successful engagements." The general's massive form straightened with interest. This was more appealing than a simple demonstration. A hunt through vegetation against primitive opponents would be excellent training for his soldiers, and it would provide clear metrics for assessing human military capability. "Very well," he decided. "My battalion against your team. We will give you 6 hours to position your forces anywhere within a 20-kilometer radius of this base. At dawn, we will hunt you down and eliminate your force. This will demonstrate the difference between proper military tactics and whatever primitive methods your species has developed." Sarah's smile didn't change, but something in her eyes grew sharper. 6 hours should be sufficient. I assume your sensors can track our weapons and equipment to verify eliminations. Naturally, we have full-spectrum monitoring capability. Your primitive weapons and equipment will be clearly visible to our targeting systems. Excellent. We'll begin positioning our forces immediately. See you at dawn, General. As Sarah melted back into the jungle, Korthak felt a moment of something he couldn't quite identify. Not concern, certainly. His battalion had faced opponents with advanced technology, superior numbers, and years of experience. A handful of humans with primitive equipment operating in familiar terrain posed no significant challenge, but as the night settled over the jungle and his soldiers maintained their vigilant watch over the cleared perimeter, strange sounds began to filter through the darkness, not the mechanical noises of military equipment or the obvious sounds of soldiers moving through vegetation. Instead, the jungle itself seemed to be whispering. Birds called to each other in patterns that almost sounded like coded messages. Insects clicked and buzzed in rhythms that suggested communication. The very trees seemed to rustle and sway in ways that had nothing to do with the wind. It was as if the entire forest had suddenly become aware of their presence and was passing information from creature to creature, plant to plant, in a network that spanned the entire region. Lieutenant Vexcor, Korthak's second-in-command, approached with a concerned expression. "General, our sensor sweeps are detecting unusual biological activity. The local ecosystem appears to be agitated." "Explain." "Animal movement patterns have shifted significantly since the human colonel departed. Migration paths that were established over centuries appear to have changed overnight. Predator species are moving into positions they've never occupied before. The entire food web seems to be reorganizing itself." Korthak considered this information. In his experience conquering jungle worlds, the local wildlife typically fled from superior military forces or adapted to their presence over time. He had never encountered an ecosystem that appeared to be actively responding to a military operation in progress. "Continue monitoring," he ordered, "but maintain focus on detecting human military activity. These biological changes are likely coincidental." Throughout the night, his soldiers reported increasingly strange phenomena. Trees that had been mapped in one location appeared to have moved slightly by morning. Paths that their scouts had marked as clear were suddenly blocked by fallen logs or dense vegetation. Water sources that had been identified during their initial surveys had apparently shifted course overnight. Most disturbing of all, their advanced sensor systems. Design. The lesson. The first Iron Claws squad vanished 3 hours into the operation. General Korthak stared at his tactical display, where Squad 7's signal had simply disappeared without any indication of combat, distress calls, or equipment malfunction. One moment, 6 of his elite soldiers were moving through the jungle following standard search patterns. The next moment, they were gone. "Squad 7, report status," his communications officer called repeatedly into the radio. Only the sounds of the jungle replied. Lieutenant Vexcor's mandibles clicked nervously as he studied the sensor data. "General, we have no indications of weapons fire, explosive devices, or energy discharges in their last known position. According to our equipment, they simply ceased to exist." Korthak's claws extended involuntarily. In 40 years of military service across dozens of worlds, he had never lost soldiers without at least detecting the cause. "Send Squad 4 to investigate. Full combat formation, constant communication checks." Squad 4 moved cautiously toward the last known position of their missing comrades. Their advanced sensors showed normal jungle readings: plants, animals, insects, the usual biological signatures of an active ecosystem. But no signs of their fellow soldiers or any indication of what had happened to them. "This is Squad 4 leader," came the voice over the radio. "We've reached the coordinates. No sign of Squad 7. No evidence of struggle or combat. It's like they were never here." "Continue searching," Korthak ordered. "Expand the perimeter and maintain constant—" The radio crackled with static, then went silent. Squad 4 had also vanished. Miles away, hidden beneath a canopy platform that had been constructed 60 feet above the jungle floor using techniques passed down through generations of indigenous peoples, Colonel Sarah Mitchell monitored the alien communications through equipment that looked primitive compared to Iron Claw's technology, but worked perfectly for their purposes. "Ghost Team Alpha, report," she whispered into her throat microphone. "2 squads neutralized," came the quiet reply from Sergeant Rodriguez, invisible somewhere in the forest below. "No injuries on either side. Subjects are secure and comfortable. The jungle is being very cooperative." Sarah smiled. The Iron Claw's soldiers weren't dead or even seriously harmed. They had been captured using methods that no galactic military manual had ever considered necessary to defend against. Methods that required understanding not just human tactics, but the deeper rhythms of the forest itself. Rodriguez's team had spent years learning to move through the jungle without disturbing a single leaf or breaking a single twig. They could lie motionless for hours, breathing so slowly that thermal sensors registered them as part of the background vegetation. Most importantly, they understood that the jungle was alive, aware, and willing to help those who approached it with respect rather than the intention to dominate. The captured Iron Claw's soldiers had been darted with sedatives and carefully moved to secure locations where they would wake up unharmed but thoroughly confused. Each capture had been accomplished without triggering a single one of their advanced sensors because the humans hadn't fought the jungle's natural systems. They had worked with them. Back at the alien base camp, General Korthak faced a situation that challenged every assumption he had made about warfare. 2 of his elite squads had vanished without a trace. His sensors were detecting thousands of false readings throughout the forest, and the jungle itself seemed to be actively working against his forces. "All units, fall back to defensive positions around the base," he ordered. "Establish overlapping fields of fire and maintain constant visual contact with adjacent units." But as his soldiers moved back toward their cleared and fortified position, they discovered something that sent a chill through even the most experienced warriors. The paths they had cut through the jungle that morning were no longer there. In their place stood walls of vegetation so thick and seemingly ancient that it appeared to have been growing undisturbed for decades. "General," Lieutenant Vexcor's voice carried a note of something that Iron Claw's warriors rarely experienced: uncertainty. "Our extraction routes have been altered. The jungle appears to have regrown overnight." This was impossible according to everything Korthak understood about biology and tactical warfare. Plants didn't grow fast enough to block military paths in a matter of hours, and local wildlife didn't coordinate to interfere with military operations. Yet the evidence was undeniable. From her position high in the canopy, Sarah could see the alien soldiers clustering around their base camp, their advanced technology unable to cope with an opponent that fought using rules they had never encountered. She activated her radio, switching to the frequency the Iron Claws had been using for their communications. "General Korthak, this is Colonel Mitchell. Are you ready to discuss the results of our training exercise?" The general's voice, when it came through his translator, carried notes of frustration and growing respect. "Colonel, I must admit that your tactics are unconventional. How did you eliminate my soldiers without triggering any of our detection systems?" "We didn't eliminate them, General. Your soldiers are all safe and unharmed. And the reason your systems didn't detect our methods is because we didn't fight the jungle. We asked it to help us." "That is not a militarily viable strategy, Colonel. Vegetation and wildlife cannot be recruited as military assets." Sarah's laugh carried clearly through the radio. "General, you and your forces have been operating under the assumption that the jungle is terrain to be conquered and controlled. But what if it's not just terrain? What if it's a living system that can choose to work with you or against you?" As if in response to her words, the sounds of the forest suddenly changed. The constant background noise of birds, insects, and animals fell silent for a moment, then resumed in a pattern that sounded almost like music. The aliens' sensors, designed to detect threats and military equipment, suddenly showed readings that seemed to indicate the presence of a vast, coordinated intelligence spread throughout the entire forest. "Your technology is impressive, General," Sarah continued. "But it's designed to fight wars between civilizations that have forgotten how to listen to the worlds they live on. Every piece of equipment you brought into this jungle announces your presence to every living thing for kilometers around. You cleared away the trees to create fields of fire, but you also destroyed the natural camouflage that could have protected you. You brought artificial lights that blinded you to the subtle communications happening all around you in the darkness." General Korthak felt something he hadn't experienced since his early days as a young soldier. The realization that he was facing an enemy whose capabilities he had completely misunderstood. "What are you saying, Colonel?" "I'm saying that human military doctrine developed differently than yours because we never conquered our wilderness areas. We learned to become part of them. My soldiers don't just train in the jungle, they're accepted by it. They understand its moods, its rhythms, its intelligence. When we asked it to help us hide from your forces, it was happy to oblige. You're suggesting that this forest is actively participating in military operations? That's scientifically impossible. Is it?" Sarah's voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. "General, how many planets has your species conquered by replacing their natural ecosystems with artificial environments designed for military efficiency?" Korthak considered the question. The answer was hundreds, possibly thousands. It was standard practice for advanced civilizations to modify conquered worlds to suit their technological needs. Natural environments were inefficient, unpredictable, and difficult to control. "And in all those conquests," Sarah continued, "how many times did you encounter organized resistance from the planets themselves?" The answer to that question was 0. But then, Korthak realized they had never given those worlds the opportunity to resist. They had simply eliminated anything that might interfere with their military objectives. "What I'm suggesting, General, is that you've never fought an enemy that had allies you couldn't see or understand. My soldiers aren't just trained in jungle warfare. They're part of an ecosystem that includes every plant, animal, and microorganism in this forest. When you threatened this place, you weren't just threatening 30 human soldiers. You were threatening their home." As if to emphasize her point, the jungle around the alien base camp suddenly came alive with sound. Not chaotic noise, but what clearly sounded like coordinated communication. Birds calling in patterns, insects clicking in rhythm, trees rustling in sequences that carried information across kilometers of forest. For the first time in his military career, General Korthak found himself completely outmatched not by superior technology or greater numbers, but by an approach to warfare that his entire civilization had never considered. The humans hadn't just learned to fight in the wilderness. They had learned to fight as part of it. "Colonel Mitchell," he said finally, his pride struggling with his growing understanding of just how badly he had miscalculated. "I believe this training exercise has been more educational than I anticipated. Perhaps there are things about warfare that the galactic community could learn from Earth." Sarah's voice carried warmth now, the tension of combat replaced by the satisfaction of a teacher whose student had finally grasped an important lesson. "General, would you like us to return your soldiers? They're all safe, and I think they've had time to consider some new perspectives on jungle warfare." As the captured Iron Claw's soldiers began emerging from the forest, led by grinning human soldiers who had achieved the impossible task of capturing elite galactic warriors without firing a shot, General Korthak began composing his report to the Galactic Council. It would not be the routine assessment he had expected to file. Instead, it would be the first military analysis in galactic history to recommend that an advanced civilization had something crucial to learn from a species that still preserved its wilderness areas. The humans, Korthak realized, hadn't failed to advance beyond primitive tactics. They had advanced to something the galaxy had forgotten, the understanding that some allies couldn't be built or programmed or conquered. They could only be earned through respect, patience, and the wisdom to recognize that intelligence came in forms that no military scanner could detect. Earth would be accepted into the Galactic Alliance, but not as the junior partner everyone had expected. They would be the teachers, the specialists, called upon when conflicts arose in environments that couldn't be solved by superior firepower alone. And in the depths of the Amazon rainforest, the jungle settled back into its ancient rhythms, having successfully defended both its human partners and its own sovereign right to exist on its own terms. The trees whispered the story to each other, a tale that would be remembered in leaf and bark and root long after the stars themselves had changed their patterns in the sky, to detect military equipment and human body heat signatures, were picking up thousands of readings throughout the surrounding jungle. But every time they investigated, they found only animals, insects, and plants going about what appeared to be perfectly natural business. As dawn broke over the rainforest, General Korthak prepared his forces for what he expected to be a brief and educational hunt. His battalion was organized into standard search and destroy formations, equipped with the finest military technology the galaxy had to offer, and commanded by officers with centuries of combined combat experience. What he didn't understand, as his soldiers moved out into the jungle following textbook tactical procedures, was that Colonel Sarah Mitchell and her team had spent the night doing something no galactic military force had ever attempted. They hadn't just hidden in the jungle. They had asked the jungle to hide them, and for the first time in its long history, the rainforest had agreed to go to war. Dense jungles of Earth, soldiers who had spent their entire careers learning to become one with their environment were receiving word that visitors from the stars wanted to see how warfare was conducted in their domain. The Galactic Council had made their assessment based on the assumption that wilderness was something to be conquered, controlled, or eliminated. They were about to discover that for some species, the wilderness wasn't an obstacle to be overcome. It was a weapon to be wielded by those who understood its true power. As the council chamber lights dimmed and the galactic leaders departed to their respective worlds, none of them suspected that their routine assessment was about to become a lesson in why some civilizations choose to preserve their wild places, and why the humans who trained in Earth's jungles might know something about warfare that the galaxy's greatest military minds had never considered.